Welcome to the online forum for the 65th House District hosted by the Clermont County League of Women Voters. Our candidates are Republican John Becker and Democrat Patricia Lawrence. We will open the forum with opening statements from each candidate, followed by questions and closing statements. We will start alphabetically. Mr. Becker, you have 3 minutes for your opening statement. Please watch the timer so you know how much time you have left. Thank you.
Sure. I'd like to thank the League for putting this on and giving us the opportunity to compare and contrast so the voters can make an informed decision. I'm John Becker. I'm your state representative. I'm in my currently my 3rd term in the State House, and I'm running for my 4th term. I've lived in the Clermont County area most of my adult life, whereas in the greater Cincinnati area my entire life. My background goes back to GE, the aircraft engine plant in Evendale, where I spent about 10 years there in manufacturing, between that and Ford transmission plant in Batavia. From there I worked in the insurance industry, healthcare, and I was there about 5 years, most of that time in MetLife and part of it at Prudential. From there I spent about 15 years then in the finance and banking industry. Most of that was at the Provident Bank, some of it was at Fifth Third, also downtown. Then the last 6 years as your state representative, which I've done full time. During tax season, I also do tax returns for people, small tax business. For my education, I have a bachelor's degree with business management with a minor in psychology. I got that from Northern Kentucky University. I have a MBA with an emphasis in taxation that I got from Xavier University. I also have a designation called a Certified Treasury Professional, CTP for short. And I have a school district treasurer's license, and I am a graduate of the Union Township Citizens Police Academy. With that, my platform is and always has been, frankly, it's the values that I've always had. It's really not related to politics so much as this is just what I'm wired for. That is being pro-life, pro-gun, limited government, and lower taxes. So with that, the most important legislation that is important to me, and I think also important to much of Ohio, that I've worked on and will continue to work on for as long as I'm in the General Assembly until I get that done, is eliminating the Ohio marriage penalty. The Ohio marriage penalty is because we have a progressive tax code, and when you file your federal return and your state return, if you have to file it either both of them joint or both of them separate. And the problem is filing them joint, so that married couples making similar incomes will pay a greater amount in tax than if they had filed separately. So as an example of how that hits all income levels, you have, say for example, a married couple that is at minimum wage. A minimum wage married couple will pay a marriage penalty of about $160. So that is something I'm working on eliminating, and maybe have some luck with it in the lame duck session coming up.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Mrs. Lawrence?
Thank you to the League for hosting this. I think it's an important part of democracy, and I appreciate that. I'm Patricia Lawrence. I'm a candidate for Ohio House District 65. I'm a wife, mother, former teacher, and deeply concerned citizen. My decision to run is not about ego. I'm running because our community deserves effective leadership. I'm a native Ohioan. I was born in Dayton. I attended the University of Cincinnati, where I met my husband, Andy. We both have our master's degrees from Xavier. We bought our first house just outside of Owensville, and then his job took us to South Carolina. We came back in 2005 and have happily lived in Miami Township ever since. My oldest daughter just graduated from Loveland High School this June, and my youngest daughter still attends. I am an effective leader who accomplishes meaningful work. I have considerable national and local board experience, and I've twice served as board president. I plan to collaborate with colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and this is not rhetoric. Already, I have reached out to Clermont's leadership and will continue to do that. County leaders and township trustees work hard, and they deserve an effective partner in Columbus who fights on their behalf. I will not waste time on fringe legislation and divisive bombast. I'll work to better our schools with less testing and more vocational training. I'll work to combat the opioid crisis that plagues our communities. We live in a time where wealth is accumulated from the stock market, but we are better and stronger when wealth comes from earning a living wage and people work one job to support their families. I will work to ensure Ohio no longer lags behind the rest of the country on job growth and wages. One of my core values is to leave things in better shape than I found them, and right now, Ohio has some work to do. Like all of you, I believe our children should have better opportunities than we did. I'm running for state representative because Ohio needs effective leadership. I know strong families and communities are at the heart of Ohio. It's time to end ideological politics and accomplish meaningful legislation that puts people first.
Thank you. Mrs. Lawrence, you get the first question. Why will you be a good state legislator?
I will be a good state legislator because I can work across the aisle. I am collaborative. I know how to get people to the table in a meaningful way and get work done. When I was board of USA, I've been on the board for US Sailing for many years, and not any longer, but there was a lot of different politics, a lot of different egos, and we knew how to sit down in a room and get things accomplished. I also believe strongly in our communities, and I believe that we need to rally around the leaders in this county and work for them, and that they need an effective partner in Columbus who will listen to them and then go to Columbus, advocate for them, bring resources back here, funding back here, and just be a good partner.
All right, thank you. I want to ask one more question before we go on. Can you restate the board that you just said, please?
It is US Sailing. It is the governing body for the sport of sailing in the United States. So it's an organization that has about 42,000 members and does everything from the Olympics down to Cowan Lake where I sail.
All right, thank you. Mr. Becker, why will you continue to be a good legislator?
Thank you for the question. There's a lot to being a legislator. Most people think of it as, how many bills have you passed? Well, it's certainly part of it. But what's really the biggest part of it is constituent service. I mean, I get phone calls, letters every day from constituents with one issue or another, and it runs the gamut. So it's a matter of attention to those constituents, getting back to them, getting them plugged in the right direction with the right government agency, or with the, or there's a lot of times they'll get with me on a federal issue, so then I get them connected with Congressman Winstrip's office. Also, since I'm a Republican and the Republicans control the State House, the majority party sets the agenda. The minority party, frankly, does very little. We don't have a filibuster in Columbus, so there's really not much the Democrats can do. So it's the Republicans that frankly call the shots. And so being the majority party, or part of the majority party, I get a seat at the table to determine or influence what the legislation is. So I think I'll just conclude with that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Becker. Mr. Becker, we're back to you. Why should voters care about what happens at the State House?
That's another good question, thank you. Most people concern themselves with what happens at the federal level, which is understandable because they see it on TV and hear it on the radio every day, and they see it in the newspaper every day. So they concentrate on federal issues, which is what they're bombarded with. Also, they get very passionate about local issues, especially school board issues, zoning issues. There's a lot of reasons you can bring people out to a meeting of some sort that people are upset about or want answers to. When it comes to the State General Assembly, we are pretty much under the radar. Most people, I find, they'll refer to me as congressman or even senator or something, and that's fine. And I don't get picky about titles. People don't understand that, and it's not a problem. But what it does is, we in the General Assembly have a great deal of influence and control over people's lives. So, for example, all the local governments, all of them, are creations of the General Assembly, creations of the state, creations of our Constitution. So, a lot of times when you have a school board issue, for example, or some people will like to complain about maybe an earnings tax, a local earnings tax, a taxation without representation. Well, if you live in the city of Milford and you're concerned about an earnings tax, sure, going to the city council is the place to go. But we in Columbus can control that also through legislation. So there's certainly a lot that people maybe don't think about day to day that we can influence in Columbus to affect their day.
Thank you. Mrs. Lawrence?
So I think the State House in a lot of ways impacts our lives more than what happens on a federal level, and I would agree with John that it does touch us on a very local level with schools and zoning and what happens here. And I think the federal level gets all the press, but what happens here probably impacts our lives more. And I'm a little distressed about this, majority party controls the agenda. Well, that may be true, but that silences a lot of voices. And Ohio is about 50-50 Democrat and Republican. And to just silence half the voices in this state, I find problematic at best and offensive at worst. And we live in a day and a time when most companies are looking how to diversify and how to bring more people to the table. So I find this exclusionary view inappropriate and not representative. I don't think that brings the best ideas forward. And I think when you have more voices at the table, you get better ideas and you get pushed. And I think when the Democrats run and we have a voice, it's better. And I really respect the legislators who work across the aisle and listen, and the legislators who can bring everybody together to get work done, because I think that's really what's the most meaningful. And it's not just about getting your constituents connected, but 19 bills introduced in the last 4 years and only one out of committee is not necessarily a record to be proud of, because that's not accomplishing meaningful work. And I think we do need to be doing work that actually gets things accomplished.
All right, thank you. Mrs. Lawrence, we'll start with you. How will you work with both parties for the good of Clermont County?
Well, I've already started. So the campaign has been a terrific way to get to know Clermont County better. I've lived here for a lot of years, but I've gone around the county, met with various boards, senior services, mental health, UC, Ohio Means Jobs, and I've already started reaching out and listening. I've gone to township trustee meetings, I've gone to school board meetings. So I think listening to people and collaborating with them and not worrying so much about party is important. And I also think we have far more in common than we have apart. We all want nice communities, we all want good schools, we want those things. If they're strong, that's the value of our house. And those are the things that we want. So maybe there's a couple of wedge issues, but we don't agree with our spouse all the time, we don't agree with our boss all the time, we don't agree with our children all the time. So I think, maybe we won't agree on every issue, but I do think I will always have Clermont's back. I think I will be there to support our leaders and our citizens. And I also think that, running as a Democrat here in a very Republican area, that would actually make me a true independent.
All right, thank you. Mr. Becker?
Sure. So the question is about working with both parties for the benefit of Clermont County. I like doing it, and I do that quite a bit. For example, I mentioned earlier about the legislation about eliminating the Ohio marriage penalty. I teamed up with a leading Democrat to do the bill. It's House Bill 333 that's before the General Assembly now. And the way that occurred was I was actually in his office. I requested the meeting, and it was on a bill where he is the minority leader of a committee that I'm on. And so it was one of my bills, and he's a smart guy, and his name is David Leland. And so I went to him and said, hey, tell me about this bill. What do you think? What are your issues? What are your concerns? I want to be able to address his concerns and find out, what they were, and not necessarily looking for an agreement, just so we have an understanding. On the way out the door, he says, hey, John, what other legislation are you working on? I said, well, I'm working on this Ohio marriage penalty. And he said, really? And so we got to talking about it, and as it turned out, he was the one that put into legislation some years ago, I think back in the 80s, the joint filing credit. So we got talking about it more and got together to do the joint bill. Also, you know, I run into Steve Myers periodically. He used to be my, or at one time he was my Democrat opponent for this office. Prominent Democrat Party. He and I, you know, yuck it up out of the county fair wherever we bump into each other, and we have a friendly debate over issues and policy. So I find getting along with the Democrats is a very easy to do and very enjoyable, and I will continue to do so.
Thank you. All right, John, we're back to you. How will you execute redistricting reforms overwhelmingly passed by voters for state house and congressional map making?
The redistricting, yeah, that is in the Constitution now, and when we will do a national census that will occur in 2020, and over that 2-year period, I guess leading up to the 2022 election, we will be redrawing both the congressional districts as well as the state house and state senate seats. So this is a new formula of how we're going to be doing this. The old formula had to do with, if it was for congressional seats, it was just a matter of the General Assembly passed a bill. It's that simple. With the state house seats, it was a matter of what was called the controlling board, and those are 5 major positions: the governor, the auditor, secretary of state, then a member of the 2 members of the General Assembly control who drew those lines. With the new formula, it changes that. I'm just trying to think what the new formula is. I'm not sure exactly, but it will require, remember the gist of it is it requires more or greater minority party involvement and agreeing to a plan. And so it could get really sticky where if the minority party, whoever that might be at the time, we don't know, if they can't agree on a map, then what will happen is a simple majority vote will then create a map for, I think, for 6 years, I want to say, and then, or maybe it's 4 years. It's either 4 years or 6 years. And then what will happen is they go back to negotiate to do a second map, or to try to finish it out for the finals 10 years. So we could have 2 different maps drawn during a 10-year period. It could get complicated. My biggest fear with the whole thing is the courts will wind up getting involved and redrawing the maps on their own. And that's been my biggest concern about that whole process.
Thank you. Patty?
First of all, I'm really happy that we are taking care of the redistricting, because Ohio is approximately 50-50, and of the 16 congressional districts, 13 are absolutely safe. So that does not, and held by Republicans, so that really does not reflect the will of the party, of the people in this state, and that it had to become a constitutional amendment really shows how fed up people are with the unfair elections, and it shows how much the legislator of one party lacked the political will to do the right thing and to be honestly and fairly elected. So I'm really pleased that 300,000 signatures were gathered by all volunteers, because I really think that speaks to the strength and the anger of the voters out there and the tiredness of people not doing the right thing. I'm pleased that the new maps will not divide things up. With today's technology, we can really pinpoint voters and carve things out, and that is just wrong. People need to have the blocks and neighborhoods. You know, there's one district that they call the Snake on the Lake in Toledo that, you know, from Toledo to Cleveland, it's, I don't even think, continuous. And we need to have fair representation. So I do hope that the parties do work together, and that it's not about political will and fighting and, you know, who's in and who's out with the minority or majority party, but that both sides of the aisle really listen to the people and represent what they want. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're back to you with the next question. The local government fund is an issue right now in Clermont County. How can you as a state legislature ensure these funds continue to come back to our local communities in Clermont County?
So there's a lot of things, about Governor Kasich that I like, and a few that I don't. I believe in balancing a budget. At my house, my husband calls me the budget director. So we do need balanced budgets. However, holding $3 billion in Columbus is not serving our community communities well. And I feel like it's a breach of trust to the taxpayers because the taxpayers paid into the local government fund to fund the local governments. And when Columbus held on to that money, they broke that promise. So in Clermont County, we have lost approximately $166 million. I know my township of Miami Township has lost about $1 million. In general, municipalities have lost half of their funding. Those are our schools, those are our fire, that's training, that's police, that's our potholes. Those are the things that we all want back here. So I think instead of advocating for more guns or marriage penalty or whatever, we need somebody in Columbus who's going to advocate to get the resources back where they belong and back to 2010 levels, because that's really what this community needs. And I think that's one of my #1 missions, to bring the funding back home, because the value of our house depends upon the strengths of our communities.
Thank you. John?
Sure. As part of my job as a legislator is to, be involved in the community. So over the past 6 years, what I've been doing is I've been attending school board meetings, I've been attending, city council meetings, village council meetings, township meetings, commissioner meetings, on and on and on. Oftentimes, especially in the smaller townships, whether it's Wayne Township, I was just out there the other night, Stone Lake Township, where I regularly attend those meetings. I'll frequently hear about problems that they have with, having to buy salt or buy asphalt, do basic maintenance that they have to do, or cemeteries that they're required to take care of. And I hear, and I've been hearing for years, about these cuts in the local government fund and how it's impacted their budgets and their ability to serve people. So I get that. The bigger townships, the Uniontown townships and Miami townships of the world, they have other ways to compensate. For example, in Union Townships, they do JEDs. That's a joint economic development district where they can impose an income tax on people who work in a certain area. So that's a way to raise revenue that the smaller townships don't have the ability to do. So having all this in mind, and I wasn't part of the General Assembly when they did those cuts some years ago, that was before I got up there. I've been meeting with, just in the last couple of months, I've been meeting with representatives from the county, called CCA, the County Association. And just yesterday I had a meeting with the OTA, the Ohio Township Association. And what I'm working on is working with them to understand how much money had been cut, the problems that that's created, and a way to restore those funds, and in a formula to do a supplemental. So that I am currently working on those ideas. I haven't started drafting a bill yet, but I'm thinking about an incremental approach, starting maybe probably with the townships, and I'm going to try to restore $25 million to the townships, and hopefully get that bill in before the end of the year.
All right, thank you. John, what are the 2 most important challenges facing Clermont County, and how can you help address them as a state legislator?
Sure. Well, the one that comes to mind is the opiate problem. Clermont County is unfortunately a leader with that problem, but the good news is it's also a leader in solving the problem. The CASC program, that's an acronym, I don't recall what it stands for off the top of my head, but that's there's a wing of the Clermont County Jail where people who have problems with opiates have a choice to be able to enter this CASC program. And it's my understanding that of the people who enter the program and complete the program, the recidivism rate is very low. So that being the case, if that's true, and that is my understanding, then that seems like the model to go statewide with that. So that's something I'm very excited about, is the success we're having here on that issue. The other issue, I guess what I'm hearing most about in Clermont County probably has to do with the local government fund, and as I addressed previously, I'm working on a plan to solve that.
Thank you. Patty?
I would agree the opioid crisis is something that plagues our communities. Ohio has one of the worst problems, and Clermont County has one of the highest rates, but I think there are really wonderful people who are working very, very hard to combat that issue, and they have reversed the trend and are leading the way on that. They need the resources and the funding and somebody in Columbus to advocate for partner. They need a partner with that. The other thing, and I would tie it into the local government fund, is how we grow and develop. Clermont County is a wonderful county. We've got a lot of great things going on. We have two great natural resources with the Little Miami River and the Ohio River, and rural and development. So how we grow and how we do development is an important piece, and how we fund things, because the local government fund being slashed and the opioid crisis has created a double whammy, as the budget has been slashed, and then you get this very expensive thing to deal with. So I would agree, you know, it's a lot about financial and funding, and I think when you look at somebody's values and the bills they introduce, you can follow the money and see where they're putting their resources, and I have not seen it come back into the community from our representatives.
All right. Thank you. Patty, we're back to you. Can you tell us how your understanding of issue 1, and will you tell us how you stand on it at this point?
Yes. So, first of all, I believe we must advocate for those who are addicted. It is a disease, and we need to treat it as a disease. But I do not believe that issue 1 is the answer. And I don't think a constitutional amendment is the way that we should do legislation on a single issue. We need to have legislators who have the political will to pass the laws to make this work, and to give judges and caseworkers the freedom to do what's right for those who are addicted. So I'm tired of people who don't have the political will. It's sort of like fair districts and fair elections, where they didn't have the political will to do it and the people had to do it. And I think this came out of frustration, because we do have a legislature that's one party and doesn't want to get in there and make meaningful legislation. So we need to do something. I just don't believe that it's issue 1. I think judges and mental health professionals have the ability to do what's best. I think we need to be able to trust their intellect and their knowledge base. They are in the trenches, they know it best, and we need to support them as legislatures and not tie their hands with something that's constitutional. And I also think that jail is not the answer, because the drugs get into the jail, and you get, you know, with privatization, guards paid $15 an hour, and they turn the other way on what's happening with the drugs in our community. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done. I think there's a lot of people working very hard on it. I'm just not sure that issue 1 is the best solution that we could have.
Thank you. John?
Sure. Yeah, my opponent and I think are pretty much on the same page in this topic. Really don't have a whole lot to add. She was very eloquent in those statements. A couple of things to point out is, as my opponent said about this being in the Constitution, if there is because it would be written into the Constitution, if there's a problem that we find an unforeseen outcome or circumstance that occurs over time, we in the General Assembly cannot fix it. The only way to fix a problem in the Constitution is to have it re-voted on by the people. And we saw that happen a few years ago with the casinos. There was, we put the mailing address of 4 casinos in our Constitution. You know, the Constitution isn't meant to be a statute book. It has become one, unfortunately, in many ways. So when a casino in Columbus wanted to move from one part of town to another part of town, it had to go back to the voters statewide. So we in Clermont County were voting on where to locate a casino in Columbus. I mean, it's ridiculous, but that's what we had to do, and that's a problem when you put, you know, statute or legislation into the Constitution. Also, you know, when you're changing penalties from, we're eliminating jail time for a lot of these drug dealers, then you have the problem with they don't have, it's going to encourage drug dealers to come to Ohio, because they don't have to worry about going to jail when they get caught, until they get caught like the 3rd time. And for the users, the people who need help, they won't have the motivation to get help that they currently have. Because, for example, currently you got somebody who has an opiate problem, they need help. They have some choices. You know, they can go to jail, and they go to that CAST program where they really can get help. And under issue 1, they can just walk away and do nothing. So it really ties the hands of law enforcement to be able to solve the problem.
Okay, thank you. Along those same lines, let's go to healthcare a little bit. John, you're up again. What will you do over the long term to ensure healthcare access for Ohio and Clermont County citizens?
The healthcare, well, currently we do effectively have universal healthcare. That is, anybody can walk in any emergency room at any time, 24/7, and get treatment for something. They have sniffles or whatever, and that's part of the problem. So you have these costs. When Obamacare passed, so all these people would supposedly start going to their physicians, PCPs, or personal physicians. Well, a lot of these people don't have personal physicians. They've never had. Plus, there's a shortage now of physicians, or has been. And so it doesn't solve the problem. It actually creates different problems kind of in different directions. What I came out with some time ago was on how to address this problem. So if I had it my way, what would we, how would we address this problem? Well, our hands are tied at the federal level, so there's a number of things we can't do. But there's ways to get waivers and things we can kind of work around and work through. But the idea I came up with was to actually create a system for universal health care. So it would be like throughout Ohio, for example, you might have like every major metropolitan area, or perhaps in every county, would have a central location where anybody could go to that facility to get whatever health care that they needed. So the cost would be, so for example, probably UC would be a good place in the Cincinnati area. So the cost would be paid for by Medicaid, as it is currently for people without means. And then the expenses would be limited because the people working these hospitals would have immunity from prosecution for liability. You would also have working these hospitals interns, for example. That would be a training hospital. So I think UC would be a good place for that. And that way it keeps costs down and people get the health care that they need. So I'd like to see something like that implemented, but we wouldn't be able to until the federal laws change.
Thank you. Patty?
So I'm a cancer survivor. I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I spent 14 months in treatment. I don't do anything by half measures, so that included surgery, chemo, radiation, and an infusion called Herceptin for a year. It was 104 doctor's appointments or trips to medical facilities, and I counted them from the day of the first mammogram to the day my report came out. Pre-existing conditions are now with me forever, even though I am healthy and have a healthy and great outlook on life. But that travels with me. Healthcare in cancer costs more than my house, and it's easy to say, well, we should have interns or volunteers. Guess what? My diagnosis was really complicated, and I am extremely grateful for the quality care and the doctors that I had. 1 month, my bill was over $50,000, and my insurance company negotiated that down to about half. So, over 14 months, do the math. Healthcare is the difference between my staying in my home, retiring, sending my girls to school, and to say that people who can't pay for it should go to UC is, first of all, just way out of touch. It's outrageously expensive and not affordable for most people. And also, just so you know, the hospital in Hamilton County that sees the most opioid overdoses and has the most problems is actually Bethesda North, not UC. They get all of the suburbs and people from the surrounding areas. So it's not always what you think, and you have to really be careful and do your homework. But to have our people cared for by interns and volunteers who cannot be sued is not a real solution.
Thank you. All right, Patty, we're back to you. A month ago, Cincinnati suffered a mass shooting. What steps, if any, should be taken to curb gun violence in our communities?
So I'm a former teacher. I went into teaching because I love students and I love learning. I feel so strongly that school should just be this safe, warm place for our students and our communities. And what happened in Cincinnati was absolutely tragic and hit close to home. Two people from Clermont County lost their lives in that. We need common sense gun safety. And I know this is a wedge issue, and people get all twitchy about it, and oh, those Democrats are gonna take away your guns. No, we're not, we're over it. Nobody's having that conversation. So first of all, we can't treat it like a wedge issue. We need to treat it like the complicated issue that it is. We need to close the loopholes on background checks and gun shows, and we need to have red flag laws. So if you see somebody has guns, you know, who is not mentally all there, they need mental health services. They don't need a gun. I think that there's a lot we could do. You know, car safety over the years, 96 people every day in this country are killed with guns. It's not just mass shootings, but it's domestic violence, it's suicide. I think gun deaths in children is the second leading cause for death with children. So we need to do things, and we need to address it as the public health crisis that it is. We wouldn't accept this for drunk driving or unsafe cars. We need to sit down and roll up our sleeves and have some very meaningful conversations and work together on it. I support the very common sense gun legislation that independents, Republicans, and moderates support by about 90%. So I think I'm a very mainstream person with that and would do very common sense gun safety.
Thank you very much. John?
Sure. Yeah, the mental health issue that's a tough one to figure out, because what you're trying to process, or what you're trying to balance, is the due process rights of people versus, you know, is a particular person dangerous, and what kind of mental health issues make a person dangerous or prone to violence. People smarter than me are trying to figure that out, and I'm looking forward to somebody coming up with that answer, because I don't know. You know, the shooting that just occurred at Fifth Third Bank, you know, it's an example of, or I should say the Fifth Third Center downtown. You know, it's an example of anybody can walk into most buildings at any time and start shooting. You know, obviously you got somebody that's deranged that would want to do something like that. You know, we've seen one horrifying example after another where that occurs. Allegedly, the theory is this person was going to go over to the federal building, but he couldn't get in because they had tight security. He wasn't able to do what he wanted to do because of the tight security. Well, that makes sense. You know, you get in and try to go to the federal building. You know, they have armed guards. They got metal detectors. That makes sense to me. That's a great gun-free zone. You know, to Fifth Third Center, even the security guards were unarmed. You know, so they have a sign on the door that says "No guns allowed." Well, does a sign on the door really stop somebody from bringing in a gun? You know, that didn't work out at Fifth Third. I mean, does that really make sense to anybody? So if you're going to have a gun-free zone, put up metal detectors and hire security guards, or don't call it a gun-free zone because you're just fooling people or trying to give people a false sense of security. So, you know, what I advocate is that honest citizens get training and learn how to shoot back in the event that they should ever have to do it. Let's hope it never happens and never happens again, but we know it will. And you know, it's horrifying to think that just innocent people can be killed and nobody can stop them.
Thank you very much. John, what should the state government do, if anything, to provide an equitable, quality public education for all children pre-K through grade 12?
Sure. You know, I hear a lot about the Droft decision and how I keep hearing about how our funding formula is unconstitutional. Well, the problem with that logic is, whenever the General Assembly passes a law, it is assumed to be constitutional unless or until a court rules otherwise. Well, the last iteration of the Droft, I think this goes back to the 90s. I think there's 4 or 5 iterations of this. And I actually did a term paper on this topic when I was studying for my school treasurer's license. So, and we have changed our formula multiple times since then. And what we're trying to do and the formula is very complex. It's the finance committee that does that. So what we're trying to do is, you know, balance, you know, equity of which school districts and students get funding, and whether it's for charter schools or whether it's, you know, funding students directly, they go to the schools of their choice, or whether, you know, it's the public schools. And, you know, what I tend to lean toward is I'd like to see resources going to the rural areas, the places, you know, I think Adams County, for example, you know, they got 2 power plants that have shut down or in the process of shutting down. And they don't have the ability to attract industry, unlike you do in the, you know, closer to the Cincinnati area. So there's rural communities that have limited abilities to raise money, or the people who need the most help from the states. And that's who I advocate for the most, to get those resources where they don't have the ability to raise them themselves. And I do like the idea of competition in schools, and I support vouchers for parents to send their children to the school that works best for them.
Thank you. Patty?
So I'm a former teacher, and the kids that I taught most tended to be our neediest kids. They were the ones who needed skills. They were the ones who didn't always come from places or homes where learning was valued. And I loved teaching those kids. They were my kids. One day somebody asked me how many kids I had, and I said, like, you know, well, 80, because those are my kids. They need to be well funded and cared for. And like adults, you cannot work when you are hungry or when you are tired. Our children cannot learn when they are hungry and they are tired. So we need to make sure that there is equitable funding around, that they are adequately cared for, there's not a food shortage. We need to make sure that the funding is there. And it's unconstitutional with the way it's been funded right now. And again, we lack that legislator that lacks the political will to do the right thing. And that's just wrong. That is not serving our rural communities, and that is not serving those underserved kids. So I think that we really have to fix that. We need to fix the funding. And I do think that our schools are the absolute bedrock of our communities. In the last 6 years, Clermont County lost $10 million from ECOT, which was an online education program. That program failed to educate our kids. When those kids went back to a regular school, they had basically missed all of that time. They failed to educate, and they cost us $10 million in Clermont County alone. The owner of that school made lots of donations to the legislatures in Columbus, and they answered to him. He lives in a multi-million-dollar house in the Florida Keys. He had no oversight and no nothing. Governor DeWine and Houston both got money from him. DeWine decided to give his back. Houston did not. They're still using that money. Our public schools are accountable to our taxpayers and the people in our communities, and we do not need schools that are answering to donors.
All right, thank you. Patty, what measures do you support to improve and secure elections and voting in our county?
So I think that there's a few things that we could do. And the first we've touched on before, and that is the ending of gerrymandering, so that every vote matters and every vote is heard. So, and that needs to happen at the congressional level, and it needs to happen at the state house level. So those are the two things, because I think gerrymandering rewards the extreme views of each party. It doesn't, for both sides, it takes people to the edges. And when you have primaries that play to your base, you don't get people who come to the middle and talk to each other and get work accomplished. I think that voters must have easy and accessible and secure voting registration and polling places. I'm disappointed that we don't have that overlap or that nice sweet spot where you could register and vote all in one day, and that we've cut back on the hours of voting and made it harder. We're certainly smart enough to figure out how to do things online. We do all our retail online. I'm sure we can figure, and that's safe and secure. We can figure out how to do our voting online. And we also need to safeguard our voting equipment and make sure that we're safe from hacking. I believe that Ohio's elections must have security, integrity, and transparency.
All right, thank you. John?
Obviously it's a concern about what hacks could occur into our voting system, and safeguards are in place to hopefully make sure that doesn't happen. It's always a risk. If anybody says they're 100% certain that nothing can go wrong, well, they're wrong. That's something we're conscientious of. The Secretary of State has been working on that. In terms of voting hours, we've expanded voter hours in recent years that you can now go vote on Saturday and Sunday during at least the weekend before. I'm not sure how many weekends leading up to the election. For security, something else I advocate for is a photo ID. You need a photo ID to do a lot of basic tasks. I mean, banking, for goodness sakes. I was just in the federal building the other day downtown. You have to have a photo ID to get in. I think it's hardly too much to ask for a photo ID. In fact, I had a bill that I proposed to require photo IDs, and where it would, to address the people who don't have the money for a photo ID, the state would pay for it, and then people with certain religious issues with photographs, that was taken into account too. So hopefully a bill or similar bill would pass in the future. And on the topic of elections, something that I'm interested in pursuing, and if I get 2 more years in the House, is to make Ohio a closed primary state. Currently, we are effectively an open primary state, where it's technically a hybrid state, but the voters of one party can cross over to the other party and influence their primaries, and that doesn't work for a good system. So if we have a closed primary, then that means anybody can change their registration at any time, just not 30 days within an election.
Thank you very much. That's all the questions we have today. So we are going to proceed to closing statements. Patty?
Thank you. Thank you for this forum. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I am asking for your vote on November 6th. If elected, I will be a true independent. Think about it. I'm a Democrat, but I answer to the constituents in this district. We might not always agree, but let's be honest, you don't always agree with your spouse or your boss or your children on everything either. But I am what you see is what you get, and I will be your advocate. I will work on your behalf. I am pragmatic, not ideological. I understand how to set meaningful goals and work in committees with multiple points of view. Accomplishing meaningful work is what I do. This campaign has taken me around the county, and I've met with leaders from senior services, mental health, township trustees, school boards, the opiate task force, Ohio Means Job, and toured UC Clermont. I've learned 3 things. First, Clermont is fortunate to have dedicated, smart people who work hard to improve the lives of the people who live here. Second, Clermont deserves a better reputation than what we have. We have outstanding programs, room for development, and enviable natural resources. We deserve recognition. Third, Clermont's leaders are tired of not receiving the support they need from the incumbent. It takes funding, resources, and collaboration to run a government. I will be the leadership in Columbus that has their backs. Gathering the right people to the table and accomplishing meaningful goals is what I have done all my life. Politicians who lack the political will or the understanding waste time. I'm a cancer survivor. I know exactly how precious every day is. Wondering if my daughters would grow up without their mother was scary. I want to ensure the world I leave them is good and safe and full of opportunities. I ask for your support, and that might mean splitting the ticket. We overcome partisan politics by returning to the days when we voted for the better candidate and not the party. We have much in common. We all want to live in nice communities with strong schools and good paying jobs. I'm an effective leader, and I will deliver.
Thank you. John?
Yes, first off, I'd like to thank the league and for putting this on. I'd like to thank my opponent. She's very good at this, and I really do like her. So I guess as a close, I wanted to just point out maybe differences in values and which of our values would work best for the voters. So the voters of Clermont County will decide between the two of us who they prefer and who mostly fits in with what they believe is right and wrong. So as part of those values, I want to just talk about in closing with endorsements. So my endorsements, I have a number of business endorsements, starting with the NFIB is the National Federation of Independent Business. They represent small business. Also the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, the Ohio Society of CPAs, the Ohio Valley Association of Builders and Contractors, that's the ABC PAC. The Ohio State Medical Association has endorsed me. I'm the have won, once again, I think I get this every year, the Friend of Agriculture Award from the Ohio Farm Bureau. The Ohio State Chiropractors Association has endorsed me, and the Cincinnati Area Board of Realtors, as well as the Ohio Realtors. I'm endorsed by the Cincinnati Right to Life, Ohio Right to Life, Ohio Value Voters, Family First PAC. Janet Porter has endorsed me personally. She used to be the chairman of the National Right to Life. I'm also rated as very conservative by the iVoter Guide, and they look at all candidates, and very conservative is their highest rating. My opponent was rated as a liberal. I'm endorsed by the NRA, and I have their highly exclusive A+ rating. Only like 5 of us, I think, in the entire state have that rating. Also Buckeye Firearms and Ohioans for Concealed Carry. I'm endorsed by the Ohio Citizens PAC, the Republican Liberty Caucus, and COAST, Coalition Opposed to Additional Spending and Taxes. Also have the highly recommended rating by Ohio Veterans United. So that's an array of organizations that specialize in their field, and they've considered both of us, and I'm the one that's gotten all those endorsements.
Thank you, John Becker and Patricia Lawrence, for participating in the forum this morning. We appreciate it very much. Thank you.